This used to be a bearded dragon, one that lived and no longer does. And this is one that still does. Don't worry, Diamond didn't die. He's doing just great. But what happens when this turns into this? Wear your hat. Wear a hat, Diamond. Today we're talking about what happens when your animal gets sick and maybe dies. My name's Adam. This is Diamond. You're watching Wickens Wicked Reptiles. Stick around. Now, this seemed really morbid, but don't worry, I wasn't putting a real skull of a bearded dragon on a living bearded dragon. That would be messed up. This is a 3D printed and perfectly painted version of a reptile skull, a bearded dragon skull, thanks to my friend GMA Tank at Paint to Life.
My name is Mike, also known as GMA Tank, from the YouTube channel Paint to Life.
Thanks, GMA Tank. Appreciate you. But if I put this on a table in front of you, you would have your doubts. This looks pretty darn real. So here's the deal. Sometimes reptiles get sick and then they die. Sometimes reptiles get sick and then you can bring them back to health. So let's just tackle that really quick. If your animal gets sick, you take them to the vet. Almost always. There's certain things, like very minor things. If you get a very minor burn on a reptile, there are ways to treat that. Do your research, obviously, of course. And still, even so, I recommend consulting a vet. But just like if your kid gets a scratch on their leg, you don't take them to the pediatrician or the hospital. You're fine. You don't need to amputate the leg. Although my dad did tell me that a lot when I got cuts on my legs when I was a kid. And things like mites. If you get like a parasite like that, you don't need to go to a vet for that. You can, but there are ways to treat it. However, if your animal gets a respiratory infection, which we'll talk about how to diagnose later, or they start becoming so lethargic and stop eating that they lose tons and tons of weight and they look sickly, go to a vet. Now, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with reptiles, but just a few really obvious ones that happen kind of frequently, or the most frequently of the things that could go wrong with reptiles, I'll say it that way. Bubbling around the mouth. If you take the head of a bearded dragon and you kind of squish it a little bit, oh my goodness, you have sharp claws. And bubbles start to come out, don't squish it like you're meaning to squish it. I mean like a little bit of pressure, or if there's bubbles coming out, or if they're constantly yawning, or if you've got a constrictor that is stargazing, staring up at the ceiling constantly. Like, there's a few different ways, and if you see something that is abnormal with your reptile, look it up, and there's always go to the vet. You can always do that anyway. And when you go to the vet, they're going to diagnose the problem. They'll probably take a fecal sample, or maybe a biopsy, or an x-ray, depends on what the sickness is, right? They're gonna diagnose what the problem is, they're gonna suggest a treatment, and in some cases, this is a video about what happens when your animals die. Sometimes that animal needs to be euthanized. Being euthanized means put to sleep forever. Euthanasia has nothing to do with kids in China, as it turns out. You'd be shocked how many comments I get just like that, for real. Anyway, if this happens, if your doctor, your veterinarian, I guess I should say, suggests that your animal isn't gonna get better, there's really nothing you can do, or you try something and it's just better to put them out of their misery because they're suffering to such a point that there's no way to bring them back without them unnecessarily suffering, it's time to consider euthanasia on your doctor's advice, on your veterinarian's advice, not some bald idiot behind the camera's advice. I'm not advising that you go around just euthanizing animals, but sometimes it needs to happen. So in those cases, your veterinarian will euthanize that animal the way that they see fit, an injection, or sometimes a CO2 chamber. There's different ways, but I'm not a veterinarian, so I'm not gonna tell a veterinarian how to do it. They're gonna do their job the way they were trained. But here's the meat and potatoes of the video, and the topic in general. Sometimes reptiles just die. And the reason for this is not that I'm healthy one time and then I'm dead. Sometimes they get sick, but in the wild, especially with reptiles, if they choose to show that symptom, they are an easy target for predators or competitors. And that's why a lot of the times if an animal has, I don't know, cancer, or they have even a broken rib, something like that, something that they can mask, they will. And oftentimes what happens is, let's suppose this is a perfect example here, right? So we've got this skeleton of a gaboon viper, again, brought to you by Paint to Life. This is 3D printed, not a real skeleton. Be a baby gaboon viper. That'd be so sad. Let's suppose that for whatever reason they break some of their ribs and the ribs start to stick into their organs. They can go septic. By the time that happens, you might not have even seen signs, right? So you had a boa constrictor, they fall off of a perch, something lands on them, like a freak accident, right? Something like that. they break a bone, it punctures an organ, they go septic, and then you find them dead. The way to find out is to take them for a post-mortem. This is something that a veterinarian will do. More or less, they will just cut your animal open.
This is cancer.
And start to run tests, start to take samples, and they will diagnose the problem. Now, if it were me and I have a beloved animal that just died out of nowhere, I'd want to know what happened. But with that said, if this isn't something that you want to pay for, because they're not free or cheap generally, you do have other options, and it's not limited to just cremation or burial. But before we go over those options, it's important to note it's generally not your fault. It's most of the time not your fault, unless you did some sort of extreme neglect. But if you're the type of person to neglect animals, you're not watching this video anyway. So if you are someone who takes great care of your animals, don't beat yourself up over it. If you take them for a post-mortem, they are going to find what happened, and a lot of the time, it wasn't the keeper's fault to begin with. So don't beat yourself up. But now, you're sitting there and you have a dead pet. It is heartbreaking, take some time, a lot of people might say, oh, it was just a snake or a lizard, and those people are silly gooses.
Because I don't like your tone right now.
These are family members to a lot of us. I get it. There is no shame in crying or being upset because your reptile died. If Diamond died, you might not see videos that week. It'd be the first week I ever missed a video. I'd be pretty broken up about it. Now, if this happens at a veterinary office, generally they're going to recommend cremation. And a lot of the time, cremation can be a group cremation where they take a bunch of animals and they give you the ashes, and it might not all be your animal. Or you can have a private cremation, but those are really expensive a lot of the time in comparison to a group cremation. I know this because I live with a vet tech who, to put it bluntly, sees a lot of animals pass away.
Emotional damage.
So I have it on good authority what happens at a veterinary office when animals get sick and die. The other option is, well, you can have the animal cremated or disposed of at the veterinary office and get nothing back. A lot of the time this is the cheaper option. So those are your 3 cremation options. You don't get it, you get it, but it might not be just yours. It could be someone else's as well, or a mix of a bunch of animals, or you can have your own animals. And while you're there before cremation, let's suppose it's a bearded dragon, you can get paw prints done in a nice frame with a picture and the whole thing, which is something that if Diamond ever passed, which he never will because he's immortal, Diamond will never die, I would do that. For sure. I would want to remember him. Another option is a take-home service. So you can get your animal basically in a sheet or a box or whatever they give it to you, and you can go bury it wherever you want. There are pet cemeteries, not the Stephen King version, but like actual pet cemeteries, or you can go to public land and bury your animal there. At the end of the day, it's really up to you. But there's 2 other options I can think of off the top of my head, and then maybe there's more options, and if I forget, let me know in the comment section below. What have you done? Maybe if someone in the comment section is going through something, you guys can talk about it. This is a tough subject to talk about. But something interesting, and maybe weird for most people, but all of us reptile people are kind of weird, taxidermy. Now this isn't real taxidermy. I do have a framed toad skeleton, and I have insects that are preserved and mounted and things. I like taxidermy. I think it's pretty cool. Generally, this is when you preserve an animal. So if it's a bear or a sheep or something like a mammal, something like that, it's a different process than if you were to do a wet specimen, which is basically you have a preservative that gets injected into the animal, and then in a jar there is preservative as well, and the animal gets plunked into the preservative, and there's a bunch of ways to do it, and I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to pretend I know how. I have wet specimens also, and what you can do is you can learn to do this at home. The animal's already dead anyway, so if you fail, just bury it. But if you want this to go very well, just take it to a taxidermist. They'll know what to do. I personally think it would be cool to have an articulated skeleton of a snake or a lizard that you loved and was part of your family. Now you can remember them forever. Now this might be morbid to some people, and I'm not saying that it's weird if you think that this is weird. It's a personal preference. In my opinion, it's cool, it's scientific, it's something that I can remember the animal by. And the last option that I can think of, life eats life. And if you have a collection where you have something like a king snake and one of your smaller snakes or smaller lizard dies, and you don't want that life or that body to go to waste, well, king snakes will take care of that problem for you. This might sound gross, but hear me out. I breed leopard geckos. I didn't breed any this year or last year, but I bred leopard geckos for several seasons. And sometimes the babies just fail to thrive. They don't make it. And in that case, I fed them to my king snake Big Lou. Again, I know this might seem weird, but at the end of the day, why would I waste a perfectly good, nutritious meal, which is what they are, for a king snake? To put them in the ground, they're gonna do nothing. To cremate them, nothing, right? I don't have an attachment to this animal. I loved the animal because it's a living thing, but they don't have names yet. I'm not gonna put anything on a headstone or a cross if I put them in the ground. It just makes way more sense to use it to provide nourishment to life that is still living. With that said, if you have a loved pet, like if Diamond died, I wouldn't feed it to a king cobra or something that would eat it that's big enough. So it just depends. It's up to you. At the end of the day, I wanted to present options to you because I get this question so often. Hey, I had a really rough time. My chameleon died. What do I do now? And it's not as obvious as you might think. So a little bit of a weirder video, but I want to say a special thanks to Paint to Life.
Thanks, Adam. Hello, fellow Wickens Wicked Reptile fans. My name is Mike, also known as GMA Tank, from the YouTube channel Paint to Life. At Paint to Life, I create and paint Dungeons & Dragons miniatures while narrating a short story on the subject written by me. Undead, elementals, monstrosities, and of course, the best of fantasy reptiles, dragons. Lots of dragons. So, if you love wicked fantasy reptiles as much as you do wicked real reptiles, enjoy playing D&D, or just love the fantasy genre, I welcome you to subscribe to Paint to Life. I'm GMA Tank. Let's get painting.
Really cool skulls like this one, which is a horned lizard, which actually has some of the vertebrae on the back of it, which is really cool. Horned lizards are from the southwest of the US, by the way. Very cool lizards. They shoot blood from their eyes and stuff. And with that, what do you think? Do you have a story that you want to tell of maybe a tragic time that maybe helps someone else that's going through it right now get through it? What do you do when your animals pass away? This feels so weird even asking that. Let me know in the comment section below and hit like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Not about death, but like just about reptiles, I guess. And a special thank you to the Patreon supporters. You guys are freaking awesome. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. It helps me feed, bro, the amount of animals. It's an awesome platform to connect with different people. It's a way to support this channel if you're into that sort of thing. It turns out that having all these animals to make videos with is awesome and fulfilling, and I love it, but it's kind of expensive. So every dollar goes back to the animals, and you can get discounts on merch, extra videos. There's Patreon-only vlogs starting next month. So for as little as $1 a month, you get a whole bunch of extra stuff. Oh, and you know about the special amphibian that I haven't told anybody about yet. With that, I'll see you on Monday. Or Thursday. It'll be Thursday. I'll see you on Thursday.